My father joked, "Without us, you would always be a pathetic nobody." Everyone laughed, including my golden sister. I raised my glass. Challenge accepted. That night I resigned, cut contact, and vanished. A year later, they're the ones begging now. But to understand how I could walk away from my own flesh and blood so coldly, you need to understand the hell I survived for 10 years working inside my family's empire. My name is Merritt. For a decade, I was the invisible brain behind Gideon Events, the most prestigious event management and luxury catering company in the state. If you attended a high society wedding, a millionaire's charity gala, or a corporate retreat that looked like it belonged in a magazine, I was the one who built it. I planned the logistics, I negotiated the vendor contracts, I stayed awake for 48 hours straight making sure the imported orchids did not wilt in the summer heat. But if you looked at the company website or the glossy magazine spreads, you would not see my face. You would see my father, Gideon, with his custom-tailored suits and perfectly silver hair. And right beside him, you would see my younger sister, Sutton. The golden child. The face of the franchise. The breaking point happened exactly 1 year ago. It was the 30th anniversary gala for our company. We were hosting it at the most exclusive ballroom in the city, a venue I had personally secured after months of grueling negotiations. The room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over the 300 guests. Waiters moved seamlessly through the crowd carrying silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne. It was a masterpiece. My masterpiece. I was exhausted. My feet were bleeding inside my sensible black heels. I had been at the venue since 4 o'clock in the morning, directing the lighting crew, managing the floral installations, and putting out a dozen different fires that Sutton had started by forgetting to confirm the valet service. At 8 o'clock, dinner was served. I finally allowed myself to sit down at the main family table. I was seated at the far end, right next to the kitchen doors, so I could keep an eye on the catering staff. At the center of the table sat my father, Gideon, holding court. To his right was my mother, Daria, dripping in diamonds that my sweat had paid for. To his left was Sutton, wearing a silk designer gown that cost more than my entire yearly salary. The dinner conversation was loud and self-congratulatory. Clients and local politicians were stopping by the table to shake Gideon's hand. "This is the event of the season, Gideon," one of our biggest corporate clients said, raising his glass. "I do not know how you do it." Gideon smiled that polished, camera-ready smile. "It takes vision," he said smoothly. "And of course, it helps to have my beautiful Sutton by my side. She has such an incredible eye for elegance." Sutton giggled and tossed her perfect blonde hair. "Oh, Daddy, stop. I just want everything to be perfect for our clients." I took a slow sip of my water. My jaw ached from clenching it. Sutton had not lifted a single finger for this event. She had spent the entire week at a luxury spa retreat, claiming she needed to be glowing for the anniversary photos. I had done every single ounce of the work. A few minutes later, the conversation shifted to the future of the company. A local journalist who was covering the event leaned across the table. "So, Merritt," the journalist asked, looking at me, "you are the older sister. What exactly is your role in all this magic?" Before I could even open my mouth to answer, my father cut in. His voice was loud, carrying easily over the soft jazz music playing in the background. "Oh, Merritt helps out in the back office," Gideon said dismissively, waving his hand in the air. "She is good with spreadsheets. But let us be honest, she does not have the charisma for the front lines. In fact, if it were not for us giving her a job, she would probably be filing papers in some dusty cubicle downtown." He took a sip of his bourbon and leaned back in his chair, looking directly at me. "Let us face it, Merritt. Without us, you would always be a pathetic nobody." The table went completely silent for a fraction of a second. The journalist looked incredibly uncomfortable. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything, in my defense. Daria just looked down at her plate and took a delicate bite of her salmon. And then, Sutton laughed. It was a sharp, mocking sound. "It is true," she snickered. "Remember when she tried to lead the client pitch last year? She wore that awful gray pantsuit. The client thought she was the accountant. Gideon chuckled. A few of the sycophantic guests joined in. Soon, a ripple of laughter spread around the table. They were laughing at me. My own family, mocking my existence, publicly humiliating me in the middle of a room that I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not stand up and flip the table, even though every fiber of my being wanted to. A strange, icy calm washed over me. It was a moment of absolute clarity. For 10 years, I had believed that if I just worked harder, if I just proved my worth, they would eventually respect me. In that single moment, under the light of the crystal chandelier, I realized the truth. They would never respect me. I was just the workhorse. I picked up my glass of red wine. I looked directly into my father's eyes. The laughter at the table slowly died down as they noticed my intense stare. "Challenge accepted," I said softly, but clearly. Gideon frowned, clearly confused. "Excuse me?" I did not repeat myself. I simply set the glass down. Just then, the head waiter approached the table. He leaned down and placed a leather-bound folio in front of my father. The bill for the evening's extra expenses. Gideon picked it up, barely glanced at it, and then, with a smirk, he slid it across the table until it stopped right in front of my plate. "You can handle this, right, back office?" Gideon sneered. "Consider it your contribution to the family." He was making me pay for the very party where he just humiliated me. I looked at the bill, then back at him. I gave a tight, empty smile. "Of course, Gideon." They all went back to their conversations, thinking I had submitted like I always did. But they did not know that the soft clinking sound of my wine glass hitting the table was the death knell for their entire empire. To fully grasp the magnitude of my decision that night, you have to look back. My history with my family was not just a series of small annoyances. It was a carefully curated museum of pain, filled with artifacts of their betrayal and my foolish loyalty. Let us start with Exhibit A. The $50,000 theft. 5 years ago, I landed my first massive solo contract. It was a 3-day corporate retreat for a major tech company. I spent 2 months pitching, designing, and negotiating. I pulled all-nighters, drinking cold coffee, researching every single detail of the client's brand. When they finally signed the contract, it was worth $50,000 in pure profit for our company. It was the biggest win of my career. I rushed into Gideon's office, beaming with pride, waving the signed contract. I thought this was it. This was the moment my father would finally look at me with pride. Gideon took the contract, put on his reading glasses, and scanned it. He did not say congratulations. He did not say good job. He reached into his desk, pulled out a heavy black pen, and physically crossed out my name on the account manager line. Right in front of my eyes, he wrote Sutton's name instead. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I did all the work. I closed the deal." Gideon did not even look up. "The client is a young, hip tech company," he said coldly. "They want to deal with someone who matches their energy. Sutton has the right look. You are a bit too rigid, Merritt. It is better for the brand if Sutton is the face of this account. You will still do the logistics behind the scenes, of course." I was devastated. I went to my mother, hoping for a shred of justice. I found Daria in the sunroom, arranging imported tulips. I told her what happened, tears streaming down my face. Daria sighed, a sound of profound annoyance, as if my heartbreak was an inconvenience to her afternoon. "Oh, Merritt, please do not be so dramatic," she said, not even looking away from her flowers. "You know your sister is beautiful and fits the company image perfectly. You are the brain, she is the beauty. You are the older sister. You need to learn how to step back and let her shine. Why must you always be so jealous?" Jealous. I was working 90-hour weeks while my sister went on shopping sprees in Paris, and I was the jealous one. Then there was Exhibit B. The great contrast. By my 7th year at the company, the business was booming, entirely due to the operational systems I had built from scratch. We were bringing in record profits. I asked Gideon for a raise. I was still making a pitiful entry-level salary. I told him my car was breaking down and I needed to replace it so I could safely get to the event sites. We are reinvesting everything into the business right now, Merritt, Gideon had said smoothly. We all have to make sacrifices for the family legacy. Tighten your belt. 2 days later. 2 days. Sutton pulled into the office parking lot in a brand new, cherry red sports car. A car that cost $120,000. She paraded around the office, tossing the keys in the air. Daddy bought it for me as a performance bonus, Sutton squealed to the receptionists. He said, I have been working so hard lately. Her hard work consisted of showing up to the events for 1 hour, taking selfies for the company's social media pages, and then leaving to get drinks with her friends. Meanwhile, I was wearing a cheap, outdated blazer, sleeping 4 hours a night, and driving a car with a broken heater in the middle of winter. I confronted Gideon. How could you give her a $120,000 bonus when you told me we had no money? I demanded. Gideon slammed his hands on his desk. Because she brings in the clients, Merritt. People want to be around her. People want to buy what she is selling. What do you bring? Spreadsheets? Checklists? Anyone can do what you do. You are easily replaceable. Sutton is a star. Do not ever question my financial decisions again. Anyone can do what you do. Those words echoed in my head for years. They battered my self-esteem down to nothing. I started to believe them. I started to believe that I was lucky they even kept me around. That is the insidious nature of toxic family dynamics. When the people who are supposed to love and protect you constantly tell you that you are worthless, you eventually internalize the abuse. You become a prisoner in a cage built by your own family. I became the scapegoat, the invisible workhorse. If an event went perfectly, Gideon and Sutton took all the credit in the magazines. If a single napkin was folded incorrectly, I was dragged into my father's office and berated for an hour about my incompetence. I kept thinking, if I just stay quiet, if I just fix this one problem, if I just make them $1 more million, they will see me. They will love me. But as I sat at that 30th anniversary gala, listening to the echoes of their cruel laughter, staring at the bill they expected me to pay, I looked at the exhibits in my mental museum of pain. I realized that my loyalty was not a virtue. It was a sickness. And the only cure was to cut out the infection completely. I was done hoping for their love. I was ready to give them exactly what they asked for. My absence. Could anyone really do what I do? I was about to find out. And more importantly, so were they. The anniversary gala ended around midnight. Gideon, Daria, and Sutton left in a chauffeured town car, laughing and completely oblivious to the shift that had just occurred in the universe. I stayed behind, overseeing the cleanup crew until 2 in the morning. I paid the extra venue bill out of my own meager savings account, keeping the receipt. It would be the last dime this family ever extracted from me. Instead of going to my small, run-down apartment, I drove straight to the Gideon Events corporate office downtown. The building was dark and entirely silent. The smell of stale coffee and expensive room spray lingered in the air. I walked through the empty hallways, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. I went directly to my father's corner office. He was notoriously sloppy with his paperwork when he was drinking, and he had been drinking heavily at the gala. Sure enough, the heavy mahogany door was unlocked. I walked in and turned on the small desk lamp. His massive oak desk was cluttered with files. Behind the desk, the painting on the wall was pushed aside, revealing the wall safe. The digital display was dark, but the heavy metal door was slightly ajar. Gideon had opened it earlier in the day to retrieve his expensive watch for the party and had forgotten to spin the dial to lock it. I pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside were stacks of cash, a few velvet jewelry boxes, and several thick manila envelopes. I was not interested in the money. I was looking for my own employment contract, which I needed to review before I made my next move. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. As I flipped through them, a specific file caught my eye. It was labeled with the name of our top corporate law firm. The date on the front was from 2 weeks ago. I opened it. The legal jargon was dense, but I had spent 10 years reviewing vendor contracts. I knew how to read the fine print. It was a succession plan. An official, legally binding restructuring of the company's equity and assets. I read the paragraphs slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs. Upon the retirement or passing of Gideon, 100% of the voting shares, intellectual property, and liquid assets of Gideon Events would be transferred to the sole heir. I traced my finger down the page, looking for the name. There it was, printed in bold black ink. Sutton. There was a secondary clause. A tiny, insulting paragraph at the bottom of page 4. It stated that the employee known as Merritt would be retained as a salaried operations manager, with her continued employment contingent upon the approval of the new majority shareholder. Sutton. The valuation of the company attached to the document was staggering. $2.5 million. $2.5 million. That was the empire I had built. I had created the operational software. I had secured the vendor relationships. I had designed the event templates that made us famous. And my father was legally handing every single penny of it, every ounce of power, to the sister who did not know the difference between a peony and a ranunculus. Worse than that, they were legally chaining me to her. They intended for me to spend the rest of my life working as Sutton's obedient servant, generating wealth for her while she paraded around taking the credit. I did not feel sad. The time for tears was long gone. What I felt was a cold, terrifying rage. It was an awakening. The final layer of the good, obedient daughter burned away, leaving only a sharp, calculating strategist. I was not their daughter. I was not a sister. I was a host organism, and they were the parasites feeding on my talent. I took out my phone and took clear, high-resolution photographs of every single page of the succession plan. I put the document back into the envelope, placed it exactly where I had found it, and gently closed the safe door, making sure it looked exactly as Gideon had left it. I walked out of his office and went to my own small desk in the bullpen outside. It was time to execute a surgical extraction. I booted up my computer. The glow of the monitor illuminated the dark room. Gideon had said that anyone could do my job. He was convinced that the magic of the company was his name and Sutton's face. He truly believed that the logistics, the client relationships, the crisis management, that it was all just menial labor. I opened the company's master database. I did not touch the company's proprietary information. I did not need to steal from them. I was the one who had created it all anyway. But I did have my own personal Rolodex. Over 10 years, I had built deep, personal relationships with the best florists, caterers, lighting technicians, and venue managers in the state. They respected me. They knew who really ran the show. I carefully exported my personal contacts. Then, I began the process of severing myself from the Gideon Events network. I wiped my personal passwords. I logged out of all administrative accounts. I unlinked my personal cell phone from the company server. By the time I was finished, it was 3:30 in the morning. I sat in the silent office, looking at the empty desk. The awakening was complete. The scapegoat was dead. The mastermind had just taken the wheel. They wanted a pathetic nobody? Fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for. And when the foundation crumbled beneath their feet, they would have no one to blame but themselves. The clock on my computer monitor glowed 3:45 in the morning. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins, keeping me wide awake. I needed to move fast. Gideon usually arrived at the office by 9, and I intended to be a ghost long before his polished Italian leather shoes hit the carpet. I opened a blank document and typed out my resignation letter. It was not a tearful goodbye. It was not a long list of grievances. I refused to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had hurt me. The letter contained exactly one sentence. I resigned my position at Gideon Events, effective immediately. Good luck. I printed it, signed it with a steady hand, and placed it perfectly in the center of my desk. Next to it, I placed my heavy, silver corporate keycard and my company credit card. Then came the financial extraction. Years ago, Gideon had generously given me a small seed fund to pay for my initial hospitality management courses. It was the only thing he had ever given me, and he never let me forget it. He brought it up at every family argument to prove how ungrateful I was. I logged into my personal bank account. I had been saving secretly for years, living on practically nothing. I calculated the exact amount he had given me, applied a generous rate of inflation for the past 10 years, and wrote out a check. $48,500. It wiped out over half of my life savings, but the price of freedom was worth every single penny. I placed the check directly on top of the resignation letter. I was leaving with nothing that belonged to them. There would be no claims of theft, no legal loopholes they could use to drag me back. I was cutting the cord cleanly and permanently. I packed my few personal belongings into a cardboard box. A framed photo of myself from college, before the light had died in my eyes. A favorite coffee mug. My ergonomic mouse. At 4:30 in the morning, I walked out of the corporate building and locked the heavy glass doors behind me. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in a decade, I took a deep breath that did not feel heavy with anxiety. I drove back to my apartment. I had already made a phone call during my drive. When I pulled up to the curb, a battered blue pickup truck was already idling outside my building. Leaning against the hood was Calloway. Calloway was my mother's younger sister, my aunt. But in the Gideon family narrative, she was the black sheep. Years ago, she had refused to work in the family business, choosing instead to live a bohemian life, running an independent art gallery and living entirely on her own terms. Daria had practically disowned her for being an embarrassment to their high society image. Because of that, Calloway was the only person in the world I could trust. She knew exactly how toxic my parents were. "You actually did it," Calloway said, crushing a cigarette under her boot as I walked up. "I can see it in your eyes. The spell is broken." "It is broken," I said softly. "I need your help, Cal. I have to be gone before sunrise." Calloway did not ask questions. She did not ask if I was sure, or if I wanted to think about it. She just nodded, grabbed a stack of flattened moving boxes from the back of her truck, and followed me upstairs. We worked in silence, packing my life away with military precision. I only took what was absolutely necessary. My clothes, my laptop, my personal documents. I left behind anything that had been a gift from my family. The ugly designer bags Daria had bought me that I never used. The cheap jewelry Sutton had regifted me for Christmas. I threw them all into the trash can in the kitchen. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the apartment was empty. The morning sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a pale pink light over the city streets. I stood in the empty living room, holding my final box. "Where are we going?" Calloway asked, leaning against the doorframe. "A city 3 hours away," I said. "I already found a cheap warehouse space for rent on Craigslist. It has a small living quarters above it." Calloway raised an eyebrow. "A warehouse? Merritt, you just left a $2.5 million empire. You're going to live in a warehouse?" I smiled. It was a genuine smile. "It is a blank canvas, Cal. I am going to build my own empire. And this time, my name will be on the door." We loaded the last box into the back of her truck. I locked the apartment door and dropped the keys into the landlord's drop box. I climbed into the passenger seat of Calloway's truck. As she put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, I pulled out my cell phone. I took out the SIM card, snapped it in half, and tossed it out the window into the gutter. There would be no tracking me. There would be no furious phone calls from Gideon, demanding I come back and fix whatever mess Sutton had made. There would be no guilt trips from Daria. I was severing the timeline. I closed my eyes and imagined the scene that was about to unfold at the office. Gideon would arrive at 9 o'clock. He would expect a hot cup of coffee and a printed itinerary on his desk. Instead, he would find silence. He would walk out to the bullpen and see my empty desk. He would see the key card, the credit card, the resignation letter, and the check for $48,500. He would probably laugh at first. He would think it was a tantrum. He would tell Sutton, "Let her cool off for a few days. She will come crawling back. She needs us. She is a nobody without us." But as the days turned into weeks and the vendors stopped returning their calls and the logistics systems crashed because no one knew the administrative passwords, the laughter would stop. The ghost had left the machine. And the machine was about to tear itself apart. The warehouse was exactly as advertised on the internet, which is to say, it was a disaster. It was located in the industrial district of a sprawling city 3 hours away from my past life. The neighborhood smelled of engine oil and salt water from the nearby docks. The building itself was a giant, echoing metal box with concrete floors, exposed pipes, and a tiny, questionable studio apartment built into the loft above. When Calloway helped me carry my last box up the rickety metal stairs, she looked around the dusty loft, wiped a streak of grime from her forehead, and sighed. "Well, it is definitely not the Crystal Ballroom," she said dryly. I looked at the water stains on the ceiling and the single, bare light bulb hanging from a wire. "It is perfect," I replied. "Because it is mine." Calloway hugged me tightly before she drove back home. "Do not let them pull you back into the dark, Merritt," she whispered. "I will not," I promised. The first month was brutal. I was running on the remaining fumes of my savings. I bought a cheap burner phone with a new area code. I created a completely new digital footprint. A new email address, a new professional profile. I scrubbed every trace of my association with Gideon events from the internet. I wanted no connection to my father's name. I registered a new LLC. Lumina Events. The name felt like a promise. Light. Clarity. Truth. But having a business name does not automatically bring in clients, especially when you are a ghost with no public portfolio. I could not use any of my past work to advertise because it all legally belonged to Gideon's company. I had to start from the absolute bottom. I put on a pair of jeans and a plain black t-shirt. For 10 years, I had dressed in drab, invisible corporate wear to avoid drawing Sutton's jealousy. Now, I dressed for utility. I pulled my hair back into a tight braid. I started knocking on doors. I went to local community centers, small nonprofit organizations, and independent artists. People who needed event planning but could not afford luxury prices. My first client was a local animal shelter hosting a weekend adoption drive. Their budget was practically non-existent. $500 for the entire setup. At Gideon Events, we would not even answer the phone for a $500 budget. But I took it. I treated that animal shelter drive with the exact same intensity and precision I used for million-dollar galas. I spent 3 days turning a dirty parking lot into a vibrant, welcoming community festival. I negotiated with local food trucks to donate a portion of their sales. I used cheap, brightly colored fabric to create shade tents. I organized the layout perfectly to maximize foot traffic toward the rescue dogs. The event was a massive success. They adopted out every single animal, doubling their previous record. At the end of the day, the shelter director, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, walked up to me. She had tears in her eyes. She grabbed both of my hands and squeezed them tightly. "You are a miracle worker, Merritt," she said, her voice shaking with gratitude. "I have never seen this place look so beautiful. We could never have done this without you. Thank you." I stood there stunned. It was such a simple phrase. Thank you. But in 10 years of working for my family, generating millions of dollars in revenue, I had never once heard those words directed at me. It was always, "Thank you, Gideon. Thank you, Sutton." I was just the background noise. Hearing someone look me in the eye and acknowledge my specific value felt like a shock to my nervous system. I smiled, and for the first time in my adult life, it reached my eyes. "You are very welcome," I said. That small event was the spark. Word of mouth in the nonprofit sector travels fast. The shelter director recommended me to a local art gallery, which recommended me to a regional charity board. I worked tirelessly. I lived on ramen noodles and instant coffee. I spent my days pitching clients and my nights drafting floor plans on a cheap folding table in my dusty loft. Slowly, I began to change. Not just professionally, but physically. The constant, grinding anxiety that used to sit heavy in my chest had evaporated. I started sleeping through the night. The dark circles under my eyes vanished. I stopped walking with my shoulders hunched. I bought a few tailored, sharp outfits in bold colors, emerald greens, and deep sapphires. Colors I would never have dared to wear around Sutton. When I looked in the small mirror in my loft bathroom, I did not recognize the woman looking back. The pathetic nobody was gone. Staring back at me was a sharp, confident CEO who knew exactly what she was worth. 6 months into my new life, Lumina Events landed its first major corporate contract. A tech startup needed a launch party. I pitched a bold, innovative concept, and I closed the deal myself. Profit margin, $30,000. I sat in my warehouse, looking at the signed contract. I had built it from nothing. No family name. No inherited wealth. Just my own intelligence and grit. Meanwhile, 3 hours away, the empire I had left behind was beginning to rot from the inside out. And the smell was about to reach the high society pages. While I was building my foundation in the shadows, Gideon Events was experiencing the devastating reality of losing its foundation. I did not need to spy on them to know what was happening. In the elite hospitality industry, gossip is the primary currency, and news travels faster than a spilled glass of red wine on a white carpet. Through my private network of vendors, the people I had quietly maintained relationships with, I heard the stories. At first, Gideon had tried to play off my disappearance as a minor inconvenience. He promoted a junior assistant to my role, assuming that my job was just answering emails and pushing papers. He thought his charm and Sutton's face were enough to keep the engine running. He was catastrophically wrong. Within 2 months, the cracks turned into gaping holes. Sutton, left to actually manage client relations without me there to whisper the answers in her ear, was a walking disaster. The first major failure was a high society wedding in the Hamptons. Sutton forgot to secure the city permits for the massive fireworks display. The police showed up and shut the reception down at 10 o'clock at night. The bride's family, furious and humiliated, threatened to sue. Gideon had to refund the entire $100,000 fee to keep them out of court. The second failure was a corporate summit. Sutton approved a catering menu without checking the dietary restrictions of the CEO, who was highly allergic to shellfish. An ambulance had to be called during the keynote speech. Another disaster. Another massive refund. By month 4, they had lost 3 major contracts. Word was spreading that Gideon Events had lost its touch. Vendors, who were used to my prompt payments and organized schedules, started refusing to work with them without massive cash deposits up front. Sutton was throwing daily temper tantrums in the office, blaming everyone but herself. Gideon was drinking more, his polished facade cracking under the stress of hemorrhaging money. In total, within half a year, they had lost over $500,000 in revenue and refunds. They were bleeding out. And then, the universe delivered the perfect, ironic twist of fate. The biggest event of the year was approaching. The Thayer Foundation Charity Gala. Arthur Thayer was a billionaire real estate mogul and the most powerful man in the city. His annual charity gala was the crown jewel of the social calendar. Securing the contract to manage it was a guarantee of prestige and millions in future business. Gideon Events had held the Thayer contract for the last 3 years, solely because I had flawlessly executed every single detail. But this year, Arthur Thayer was nervous. He had heard the rumors about Gideon's recent failures. He called Gideon into a meeting and laid down an ultimatum. Thayer demanded absolute perfection. He required a wildly innovative design concept, a flawless logistical execution plan, and a guarantee that Sutton would not be managing the floor. If Gideon failed, the Thayer Foundation would publicly sever ties with his company, effectively destroying the Gideon Events brand forever. Gideon was desperate. He knew his internal team was incapable of pulling off the level of sophistication Thayer demanded. He needed a ghostwriter. He needed a subcontractor who could do the actual heavy lifting behind the scenes, while allowing Gideon Events to slap their name on the final product and take the credit. He needed exactly what I used to be. Through his network, Gideon started searching for a boutique, discreet event management firm that could handle a massive-scale project but was hungry enough to accept a white-label contract. A white-label contract meant the subcontractor does all the work, but agrees to remain completely anonymous, signing a strict non-disclosure agreement. One of my old vendor contacts, a lighting director who knew I had started my own firm, quietly dropped the name Lumina Events onto the desk of Gideon's desperate assistant. The assistant, knowing nothing of my true identity, saw my impressive new portfolio of recent, flawless corporate events and brought it to Gideon. On a Tuesday afternoon, my burner phone rang. I did not recognize the number, but the area code was from my old city. I answered. "Lumina Events, how can I help you?" I said, keeping my voice smooth and professional. Yes, hello, a panicked, reedy voice said. This is the office of Gideon Events. I am calling on behalf of the CEO. We have a massive, high-profile gala coming up, and we are looking to bring in a specialized subcontractor to handle the logistical design and execution. We heard Lumina Events does exceptional work. I froze. For a second, the breath caught in my throat. It was Gideon's new assistant. They were calling me. They had no idea who I was, because the Lumina Events website had no photos of my face, only photos of my stunning event designs. The sheer irony of the situation hit me like a physical blow. The father who told me I was a pathetic nobody was now desperately reaching out to my anonymous company to save his dying empire. I smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. I am listening, I said. The assistant explained the parameters. It was the Thayer Gala. They needed a complete conceptual design, vendor coordination, and run-of-show execution. But, the assistant stressed, it must be completely white-labeled. Gideon Events takes all public credit. You would be strictly behind the scenes. We are willing to pay a premium for your absolute discretion. They wanted to buy a brain, because theirs was failing. Please send over the initial brief and the proposed budget, I said calmly. My legal team will review it, and we will let you know if we are interested in taking the contract. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. The warehouse suddenly did not feel so empty. It felt like a war room. Gideon did not know it, but he had just walked right into the spider's web. He was begging his discarded, invisible daughter for a lifeline. And I was going to throw him an anvil. If you are enjoying this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below telling me which city you are watching from. Every single comment helps the video reach more people, and I appreciate you so much. The email from Gideon's assistant arrived the very next morning. It contained the initial brief for the Thayer Foundation Charity Gala. As I read through the document on my laptop, sitting in my echoing warehouse, I could practically smell the desperation seeping through the digital text. They were completely lost. The brief was a chaotic mess of contradictory ideas, unrealistic timelines, and a budget that made absolutely no mathematical sense. Sutton had clearly tried to draft it, throwing in buzzwords without understanding the actual logistics of executing a 500-person luxury event. If they presented this to Arthur Thayer, he would have laughed them out of his boardroom. They were entirely dependent on whoever Lumina Events was to save them from total ruin. It was time to set the trap. I did not reply directly. I hired a sharp, aggressive corporate lawyer in the city. I instructed him to handle all communications with Gideon Events. My identity as the CEO of Lumina Events was to remain strictly confidential, protected behind layers of corporate registration and a bulletproof non-disclosure agreement. The negotiation phase was a masterpiece of legal warfare. My lawyer sent over the terms. Lumina Events would take the contract, design the concept, and execute the run of show. However, my demands were absolute. First, all communication must be done via email or through the lawyers. No phone calls. No in-person meetings. The excuse we gave was that our boutique firm was currently handling international clients, and our schedule was strictly locked. Second, the financial terms. I demanded a non-cancelable contract fee of $250,000. Not a percentage. A flat, guaranteed fee, with 50% paid up front into a secure escrow account. When Gideon saw the number, my lawyer reported that he nearly had a stroke. He tried to push back. He tried to negotiate it down to $100,000. He claimed it was an outrageous sum for a white-label subcontractor. My lawyer simply replied with one sentence. Lumina Events respectfully declines your counteroffer and wishes you luck with the Thayer Foundation Gala. 30 minutes later, the signed contract appeared in my lawyer's inbox. Gideon had no leverage. He was cornered, bleeding out, and I was the only tourniquet available. But the most crucial part of the trap was the penalty clause. I had my lawyer draft a very specific, ironclad stipulation. If Gideon Events failed to provide the necessary venue access, interfered with the logistical execution, or breached the confidentiality of the white label agreement, they would be liable for damages equal to 3 times the contract value. $750,000. It was a financial guillotine hanging directly over my father's neck. With the contract signed and the first $125,000 safely deposited into my business account, the real work began. I had 6 weeks to pull off the biggest event of my career. I worked like a woman possessed. I slept maybe 3 hours a night. My warehouse transformed into a chaotic, beautiful storm of fabric samples, lighting blueprints, and floral arrangements. I designed a concept that was breathtakingly modern, utilizing immersive projection mapping, suspended floral ceilings, and a menu that was a culinary work of art. But I did something else. I wove my own signature into the very fabric of the event. In the high-end event world, every great designer has a calling card. For years at Gideon events, my hidden signature was the use of rare, midnight blue delphiniums strategically placed at the head tables and a very specific geometric folding pattern for the linen napkins. Gideon and Sutton never even noticed these details. They were too busy taking photos for magazines. But the elite clients noticed. Arthur Thayer noticed. I saturated the Thayer Gala design with my signatures. I ordered thousands of midnight blue delphiniums. I explicitly mandated the geometric napkin folds in the catering brief. I used the exact same specialized lighting technicians that I had used for Thayer's previous galas, the ones who knew my preferred lighting cues by heart. I was building a masterpiece that screamed my name, completely disguised under the fake label of Gideon Events. Everything was coordinated flawlessly through email. Gideon's assistant would desperately send frantic messages asking for updates, and I would reply with cold, perfectly organized spreadsheets and design rendering packets. During the final week before the gala, my lawyer forwarded me an email from Gideon himself. It was addressed to the anonymous CEO of Lumina Events. The email read, "I must admit, your team's efficiency is remarkable. The designs are spectacular. I look forward to meeting you in person someday to thank you for helping us maintain our family legacy of excellence." I read the words and felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. Family legacy of excellence. He still believed he was the king. He still believed he had simply bought another workhorse to carry his golden carriage. I typed out a very brief reply and had my lawyer send it. "The pleasure will be all mine. We will see you at the gala." The trap was fully set. The bait was taken. The jaws were ready to snap shut. And the best part was, they had paid me $250,000 to build the very stage where their empire would burn to the ground. Are you ready for the main event? The night of the Thayer Foundation Charity Gala arrived. The venue was a massive, historic armory downtown, a cavernous space of exposed brick and soaring steel arches. It was an incredibly difficult space to work with, but under my direction, it had been transformed into a modern paradise. I arrived at the venue at 6 o'clock in the morning. I was dressed in standard black crew gear, wearing a headset, a black baseball cap pulled low over my face, and a medical mask. I blended in perfectly with the dozens of riggers, florists, and caterers swarming the floor. I was a ghost in my own machine. For 10 hours, I directed the symphony of chaos. I watched the projection mapping come alive, casting swirling nebulas of silver and midnight blue across the brick walls. I oversaw the installation of the suspended ceiling, a massive, upside-down meadow of white orchids, and my signature midnight blue delphiniums. It was stunning. It was perfect. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Gideon Events team arrived. I stood in the shadows near the catering kitchen and watched them walk in. Gideon was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, looking every inch the aristocratic patriarch. Daria was on his arm, dripping in emeralds. And Sutton. Sutton walked in wearing a shimmering gold gown, holding a clipboard she clearly did not know how to use, posing as if the paparazzi were already there. They walked into the main ballroom and stopped dead in their tracks. I could see the absolute shock on their faces. They had seen the digital renderings, but standing inside the actual physical manifestation of my work was a different experience entirely. Gideon looked up at the floral ceiling, his mouth slightly open. Sutton practically ran to the tables, touching the expensive linens and looking at the centerpieces with wide eyes. "This is incredible," Gideon murmured to his assistant. "Where's the Lumina team? I want to shake their hands." The assistant checked her tablet nervously. They said their execution director is on site, but they prefer to remain out of sight. They requested that we do not interfere with the floor staff. Gideon waved his hand dismissively, his arrogance immediately returning. Fine. Let the help stay in the shadows. We have hands to shake. Sutton, make sure you stand near the entrance when the photographers arrive. Tell them the suspended ceiling was your inspiration. My blood ran cold, but I did not move. I just watched. I watched them steal my genius, just like they had done for a decade. Only this time, I knew the timer was ticking. At 7 o'clock, the doors opened. The elite of the city poured in. Billionaires, politicians, celebrities. The atmosphere was electric. The guests were audibly gasping as they entered the ballroom. I retreated to a small, private green room located behind the main stage. I took off my headset. I took off the black cap and the medical mask. Inside a garment bag hanging on the door was the armor I had chosen for tonight. It was a floor-length, tailored evening gown in a shade of brilliant, undeniable blood red. It was a dress that commanded attention. It was a dress that refused to be ignored. It was the exact opposite of the invisible gray pantsuits I had worn for 10 years. I slipped into the dress. I applied my makeup with a steady hand. Red lipstick. Sharp eyeliner. I brushed out my hair until it fell in dark waves over my shoulders. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The pathetic nobody was dead. I was the architect of my own destiny now. I cracked the green room door open just enough to see the main stage and the front tables. Dinner was served flawlessly. The geometric napkins were unfolded. The wine was poured. At the head table, Gideon and Sutton were basking in the glory. People were coming up to them constantly, shaking Gideon's hand, kissing Sutton's cheek. Gideon, this is your best work yet, the mayor said, clapping my father on the shoulder. Simply extraordinary. Thank you. Arthur gave us a challenge, and our family always rises to the occasion. Gideon beamed smoothly. Sutton really outdid herself with the floral concepts this year. Sutton gave a modest, practiced smile. It just came to me in a dream, she lied effortlessly. At 9 o'clock, it was time for the keynote address. The house lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center of the stage. Arthur Thayer, the billionaire benefactor, walked up to the podium. The room fell into a respectful silence. Thayer adjusted the microphone. He was a shrewd, sharp-eyed man who did not tolerate fools. He looked out over the crowd. Welcome, everyone, to the most successful fundraising night in the history of our foundation, Thayer began. His voice echoed through the armory. Look around you. The beauty of this room is a testament to what happens when true vision meets relentless dedication. Gideon puffed out his chest at the front table. Sutton touched her hair, getting ready for the applause. Now, Thayer continued, pulling a small card from his tuxedo pocket. I have worked with Gideon events for years, and I am a man who pays very close attention to details. He paused. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy. When I walked in tonight, Thayer said, his voice lowering slightly, I noticed the midnight blue delphiniums. I noticed the specific geometric folds of the linens. I noticed a level of logistical perfection that I have not seen from Gideon events in over 6 months. Gideon's smile faltered. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Thayer looked directly at Gideon. You see, Gideon, I do not like being lied to. I made it clear that I wanted perfection tonight. You promised me your family team could deliver. But my security team does routine background checks on all major vendors. And they found a very interesting corporate trail leading back to the actual architects of tonight's gala. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sutton looked panicked. Gideon's face was turning a pale shade of gray. So tonight, Thayer said, his voice ringing out clearly, I would like to properly thank the true visionary behind this masterpiece. Because credit belongs where credit is earned. Thayer looked toward the side of the stage. The heavy velvet curtains. He gestured with his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your applause to the brilliant CEO of Lumina Events. The spotlight snapped away from the podium. It swept across the dark room, slicing through the darkness, until it hit the velvet curtains. The music swelled, and I pushed the curtains open. I stepped out of the shadows and into the blinding circle of the spotlight. The brilliant red of my dress caught the light like a flame. I did not rush. I walked with slow, measured, deliberate steps across the raised stage toward Arthur Thayer. The click of my heels echoed through the massive sound system. For a few seconds, the crowd was merely curious. They were clapping politely, waiting to see who this mysterious CEO was. But at the front table, the reaction was instantaneous and violent. Gideon actually half stood up from his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. His jaw dropped. Daria gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest, clutching her diamond necklace as if she were having a heart attack. And Sutton just stared. Her eyes were wide, completely unblinking. The glass of champagne in her hand tilted. The expensive liquid poured out, pooling on the pristine white tablecloth, but she did not even notice. I reached the podium. Arthur Thayer smiled at me, a genuine, respectful smile, and stepped aside, offering me the microphone. I had met with him privately 3 days ago. I had shown him the white label contract. I had shown him the emails. I had proven that Gideon Events was a hollow shell and that I was the one who had built his previous galas. Thayer hated being deceived, and he loved absolute competence. He had agreed to give me the stage. I grasped the edges of the podium. I looked down at the sea of faces. 300 of the most powerful people in the state. And right in the front row, bathed in the glow of the stage lights, was my family. The people who had called me a pathetic nobody. The polite applause died down. The room became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and amplified to fill the entire armory. "My name is Merritt. I am the founder and CEO of Lumina Events." A confused whispering started to spread among the guests who knew the Gideon family. They recognized my name. They recognized my face. They knew I was Gideon's daughter. I looked directly at my father. He looked like he was vibrating with rage and sheer terror. "For the past 10 years, I continued, my voice cutting through the whispers like a knife. I was the invisible operations director for Gideon Events. I designed the concepts. I built the logistics. I managed the crises. But my family determined that I did not fit the aesthetic image of their brand. I was told that I was merely a back-office worker, that anyone could do my job, that without their name, I was nothing." Sutton finally dropped her champagne glass entirely. It shattered against the edge of the table. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed loudly, but no one looked away from the stage. "1 year ago," I said, "I decided to test that theory. I resigned. I walked away with nothing but the clothes in a few boxes and my own work ethic. I started Lumina Events in an empty warehouse." I gestured broadly to the magnificent room around us. The suspended ceiling. The projection mapping. When the Thayer Foundation demanded perfection for tonight, Gideon Events realized they could no longer deliver it on their own. Their internal systems had collapsed. So, they sought out the best independent firm they could find. They signed a white label contract, agreeing to pay $250,000 to a secret subcontractor, intending to take all the public credit for the work. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Wealthy socialites covered their mouths. Business moguls stared at Gideon with open disgust. In this circle, incompetence was bad, but fraudulent theft of credit was a death sentence for a reputation. "They did not know," I said, leaning closer to the microphone, a cold smile touching my lips. "They did not know that the anonymous CEO they were begging to save their reputation was me." Chaos erupted. Journalists in the back of the room started snapping photographs frantically. The flashes strobed across the room like lightning. The whispering turned into loud, overlapping conversations. Gideon could not take it anymore. The facade broke. The polished patriarch vanished, leaving only a furious, humiliated tyrant. He shoved his chair back violently. It crashed to the floor. He pointed a trembling finger at me from the floor. "You little traitor!" Gideon roared, his voice carrying without a microphone. "How dare you? You set us up. My damn Han Huk Tao? You dare humiliate me in front of my clients? The entire room fell silent again, shocked by his outburst. He had just confirmed everything I said. I did not flinch. I looked down at him from the stage, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for a small, desperate man. "I did not humiliate you, Gideon," I replied smoothly into the microphone. "I simply provided a service to a client. You were incapable of doing the work, so I did it for you. At a premium price. You humiliated yourself the moment you signed a contract to steal someone else's labor." Sutton jumped up, her face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "You are just jealous," she screamed hysterically. "You have always been jealous of me. You ruined my night." I looked at my sister, the golden child. Her crown was currently melting in the heat of the spotlight. "Sutton," I said softly, but the microphone carried every word. "I am standing on a stage I built, owning a company I founded, cashing a check that your father signed over to me because you could not do your job. Tell me, exactly what part of your life should I be jealous of?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She burst into tears, covered her face with her hands, and ran toward the exit doors, her gold dress trailing behind her like a sinking ship. Daria scrambled up and ran after her, calling her name. Arthur Thayer stepped back up to the podium, standing right next to me. He looked at Gideon. "Gideon," Thayer said, his voice like freezing iron. "The Thayer Foundation terminates its relationship with Gideon Events, effective immediately. Furthermore, I will be advising the board of the City Commerce Club to review your standing. We do not do business with frauds." It was the ultimate death blow. The Thayer endorsement was the only thing keeping Gideon's company afloat. Now, it was gone. Publicly. Brutally. Gideon stood there alone at the ruined front table, the shattered glass at his feet, the spilled champagne. He looked around the room, seeking a friendly face, an ally. But the elite crowd just stared at him with cold, judgmental eyes. He had been exposed as a parasite. He looked back up at me. For the first time in my entire life, the look in his eyes was not contempt. It was fear. Absolute, paralyzing fear. I stepped away from the podium. I did not run out the back door. I walked down the stage stairs and right into the crowd. And as I walked, the sea of billionaires, politicians, and socialites parted for me. They clapped. A few people reached out to shake my hand. I was not the invisible back office worker anymore. I was the most powerful woman in the room. And the pathetic nobody had just taken the crown. Part 10, The Power Shift, 1,200 words. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of shifting loyalties. As I moved through the ballroom, the media practically swarmed me. The local journalists who had previously ignored me at family functions were now shoving recorders in my face, asking for exclusive interviews with the mastermind who outplayed the Gideon empire. I answered their questions with polite, practiced professionalism. I did not gloat. I did not trash my family further. I simply focused on the success of Lumina events and the innovative designs we brought to the Thayer Gala. By taking the high road, I made Gideon look even more unhinged by comparison. While I was speaking with the CEO of a major tech firm who was begging for my business card, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. It was Gideon. He was pushing his way through the crowd toward me. His custom tuxedo was rumpled. His silver hair was disheveled. The aura of untouchable wealth had completely evaporated. The tech CEO saw him coming, gave Gideon a look of profound distaste, and quickly excused himself. The crowd subtly backed away, creating a small, tense bubble of isolation around us near the massive ice sculpture. "Merit," Gideon hissed. His voice was breathless, frantic. I turned to face him, holding my glass of sparkling water. "Yes, Gideon?" He grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, desperate. "You have to fix this," he whispered frantically, looking around at the judgmental stares of the guests. "You have to go back up to that microphone. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them it was an internal family dispute, a marketing stunt. If Thayer pulls out, the banks will call in our loans on Monday morning. We will be bankrupt, Merit. Bankrupt." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. "Take your hand off me," I said. My voice was low, but it held a terrifying authority. He blinked, shocked by my tone, and slowly released my arm. Please, Merritt, he pleaded. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic, whining desperation. We are family. You cannot destroy your own family. Your mother is in the bathroom having a panic attack. Sutton is inconsolable. We built that company for you to inherit one day. I actually laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. I inherited it? I asked. Do not lie to me, Gideon. Not anymore. I saw the succession documents in your safe the night I left. I know you were legally transferring 100% of the company to Sutton and keeping me as her indentured servant. Gideon's face went completely slack. The color drained from his cheeks until he looked like a corpse. He realized, in that exact moment, that I knew everything. I had always known everything. You told me I was a nobody without you, I said, stepping closer to him, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. You told me anyone could do my job. So, let them do it. I cannot, he choked out, actual tears of terror welling in his eyes. The vendors will not work with us. The clients are leaving. We need your operational systems. We need your network. Merritt, I will give you 50% of the company. I will put your name on the door. Gideon and daughter events. Please. I looked at this man who had terrorized my self-esteem for a decade. I waited for the lingering guilt of a daughter to surface. I waited to feel bad for him. But there was nothing. Just a hollow, echoing emptiness where my love for him used to be. No, I said simply. He stumbled backwards slightly, as if I had hit him. No? Without you, I said, measuring every word for maximum impact, I am a CEO with a company valued in the millions. Without me, you are quite literally a zero. You have nothing. You are nothing. The challenge has been completed. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He backed away, bumping hard into a cocktail table, sending glasses crashing to the floor. The loud noise drew the attention of the entire room. Everyone watched as Gideon, the once great king of high society, practically fled the ballroom, a broken, humiliated man. I turned my back on the exit. I took a sip of my water, plastered on a brilliant smile, and walked back into the crowd of my future clients. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been permanently rewritten. 1 month later, the fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely public. When Arthur Thayer officially announced that he was cutting ties with Gideon Events, the rest of the dominoes fell exactly as I knew they would. High society is a pack of wolves. They only respect strength, and they flee from the stench of failure. Within 2 weeks, 4 other major corporate clients canceled their contracts with my father's company, citing the breach of trust at the Thayer Gala. They all immediately reached out to Lumina Events. My inbox was overflowing. I had to rent a massive new office space in the financial district and hire a staff of 10 just to handle the influx of new business. Gideon Events could not survive the exodus. Their overhead was massive. The luxury office rent, the leased fleet of vehicles, Sutton's exorbitant salary. When the revenue stopped, the banks panicked. They called in the business loans. Gideon did not have the liquid cash to cover them. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I was sitting in my sleek, modern corner office, reviewing a contract for a celebrity wedding. My new assistant knocked gently on the glass door and stepped in. Ms. Merritt, she said hesitantly. There is an article in the Business Journal you might want to see. She placed a tablet on my desk. The headline was printed in bold, black letters. I read the article calmly. It detailed the liquidation of their assets. The corporate office had been seized. The vendors they owed money to were filing class action lawsuits. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, an audio file popped up. I pressed play. It was my mother, Daria. She was sobbing hysterically into the phone. Merritt, please, Daria cried, her voice thick with tears. Please pick up the phone. They took the house, Merritt. The bank foreclosed on the house. Your father is a mess. He will not get out of bed. Sutton had to sell her sports car just to pay the lawyers, and now she is screaming at us every day. We have nothing left. You are doing so well now. We see your name everywhere. Please, you are our daughter. You have to help us. Blood is thicker than water. Please. The voicemail clicked off. I sat in the quiet of my office, listening to the rain hit the floor to ceiling windows. Blood is thicker than water. It is funny how toxic people only remember that quote when they are drowning. They forget that the full, original quote is actually the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds you choose are stronger than the family you are born into. I did not feel a rush of malicious joy. I did not laugh like a movie villain. What I felt was an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. The heavy backpack of rocks I had been carrying for 10 years was finally gone. I picked up my phone, permanently blocked the unknown number, and deleted the voicemail. There would be no salvation for them. I was not their savior. I was just the mirror that finally forced them to look at their own ugly reflections. And they could not survive what they saw. Exactly 1 year after the night I walked out of that 30th anniversary gala with nothing but $48,500 and a shattered heart, I sat in a boardroom surrounded by my legal and financial team. My lead accountant slid a finalized valuation report across the polished mahogany table. "Congratulations, Merritt," he smiled. "Based on our current contracts, projected revenue, and brand equity, Lumina Events has officially hit a valuation of $2 million. $2 million. I traced my finger over the printed number. It was almost the exact valuation of the empire my father had tried to steal from me. But this time, it was mine. Every single penny. Every single drop of sweat. My name was on the legal documents, and no one could ever cross it out. I looked out the window of my high-rise office, watching the city move far below me. I thought about the girl who used to cry in the supply closet because her father told her she was a pathetic nobody. I wished I could go back in time, hold her hand, and tell her to stop trying to prove her worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding her. You do not need to prove to blind people that the sun is shining. You just need to step out of their shadows and stand in the light yourself. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters are actually the anchors dragging you down to the bottom of the ocean. They keep you small because your growth threatens their fragile egos. They mock you because they are terrified of what you could become if you ever realized your true power. Walking away from family is the hardest thing you will ever do. Society tells you to forgive, to compromise, to keep the peace. But you cannot compromise with someone who wants to consume you. You cannot keep the peace in a house built on your own suffering. I accepted the challenge to disappear. And in doing so, I finally found myself. Yesterday, another handwritten letter arrived at my office. It was from my mother. It was stained with tears. She wrote that my father, Gideon, has fallen severely ill due to the stress of the bankruptcy. She begged me to come to the hospital, saying that he wants to apologize before it is too late, and she asked if I could find it in my heart to give them one final chance to be a real family. So, I turn the question over to you, the jury of my story. Should I go to the hospital and give my dying father one last chance to apologize, or should I let the past bury them forever? Thank you so much for listening to my journey. If you found any strength or resonance in this story, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and let me know your answer to my question in the comments below. Your interaction helps this channel grow and allows us to share more stories of survival and triumph. Until next time, remember your worth and never let anyone tell you that you are a nobody. See you in the next video.